Hello, Mr. Senator. First and foremost, I would like to express my deepest condolences for the loss of your late husband, not just on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the rest of our staff here. I understand that you are likely nervous and concerned for this upcoming televised Congress hearing. Fortunately, we thought ahead and produced this presentation for you with a panel of experts and news reporters to help you feel ready when you walk into that room. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first expert. What exactly is a corporation?
A corporation is a group of people that operate as a single entity and are legally seen as a single entity or person under the law.
And why do corporations exist?
Corporations exist mainly to limit the liability of business owners. If a business owner created a product that hurt a consumer, they could be held personally liable and possibly sued. The person may have to give up their house or other personal assets to pay what they owe in the lawsuit. However, if a corporation is held liable and sued, the owners have limited liability. When the corporation is sued, the owner's liability is limited to the equity they own in the corporation. The more equity they own in the corporation, the more money they have to pay in a lawsuit. Not only are corporations convenient for liability purposes, but they are also able to generate capital through shares. Shares represent equity ownership in a corporation and are bought by shareholders with money that goes to profit the corporation.
Should pharmaceutical companies be incorporated?
In my opinion, pharmaceutical companies should not be incorporated. The pharmaceutical industry, time and time again, places making a profit over promoting people's well being. Profit motivates the pharmaceutical industry to create Me Too drugs, release potentially harmful drugs to the marketplace, and increase drug prices well above what they ought to be. By becoming incorporated, individuals who founded the corporation are not always held accountable for their reckless, profit motivated decisions. The more power these pharmaceutical corporations gain, the harder it is to hold them responsible for issues such as false data on drugs, adverse drug side effects, and rising drug prices.
Reporting to you from Channel 7 News, my name is Monica Johnson. Today I'm coming to you from the Ivory Coast of South Africa at the site of Hershey's chocolate plant. When you think of Hershey's chocolate, you probably think of happy children gathered around a campfire eating s'mores. But in reality, Hershey's Chocolate Corporation uses child labor. With me today is a brave young man who is here today to share some of his experiences as a child laborer in the Hershey's chocolate plant. How old are you, and when did you first start working in the plant?
Tengo 15 años y he estado trabajando en los campos de cacao desde que tenía 6 años.
What does a normal day look like for you?
Nos levantamos a las 6 de la mañana y vamos a los campos. Es mi trabajo usar un machete para abrir las ballinas de cacao. Llenamos las bolsas grandes que son más altas que yo y las arrastramos a la planta. Son muy pesadas.
What would you say to the people in charge of the Hershey's Corporation if they were listening today?
Por favor, no te quitas los trabajos porque mi familia necesita el dinero que ganamos para vivir.
The Hershey's Corporation is just one of many that use child labor and support these inhumane labor practices. Cacao farmers are often paid as little as $2 per day and child laborers even less. These children are using dangerous equipment such as machetes and chainsaws and are at high risk of serious injuries. It is the Hershey's Corporation that employs these children and refuses to improve these labor conditions.
Unfortunately, as you can see, corporations do come with costs. Now I'd like to move on to our second expert. Tell me, what is the FDA?
The Food Drug Administration, or the FDA, is what grants the approval or disapproval of pharmaceutical products that will go onto the market for consumption. However, when the drug is approved by the FDA, it has more malice effects than benevolent effects. It will be recalled, and the pharmaceutical company will have to pay settlement to those it has affected. However, this settlement is a small comparison to the profits companies bring in each year.
How are drugs approved in the US?
Here in the United States, drugs are approved via phase process. However, there are ways these pharmaceutical companies, or Big Pharma as publicly known, jump through loopholes to get their drugs approved. In regards to the phase process, it has around 5 to 6 steps in the approval of a new drug on the market. We first begin with our preclinical trials, where the pharmaceutical companies will test their drugs on rodents and other small mammals. Next, if the trials are performing well, Pharmaceutical companies will move to phase 1, where the drug is given to 80 healthy individuals to see if the drug will have adverse effects on humans to test the drug's safety. If the drug has no adverse effects, it will move on to phase 2. Next, the pharmaceutical company will move on to phase 2. This is where the drug will be tested on a target audience, aka the unhealthy individuals, which will also test the safety of the drug, similar to phase 1. For this phase, there are hundreds of participants, having people split up into 2 separate groups of placebo and the actual drug to determine the overall safety. Following phase 2, we have phase 3, which displays how the drug companies will test the overall effectiveness of the drug to see if the drug actually works. To do this, the phase is performed by a double-blind trial where neither the researchers or the patients know what drug they are getting. Once the preclinical trial and the 3 phases are completed, the pharmaceutical company will apply to a new drug application to the FDA, submitting only the data that makes a big pharma company look good. The data will be sent to a drug advisory committee, but the verdict that the committee gives does not need to be followed when the FDA makes their overall decision. If the drug is approved, it moves on to marketing. If it is not approved, the pharma company will have to resubmit new data or will change its data to get approval. Another aspect to how approval is granted is that it's not only they can change their data, they can also bribe the FDA to speed up the overall process of the drug, and that will have a strong likelihood of swaying the FDA's decision on approving the drug.
Are there any issues with the FDA that the senator should be aware of?
There are a multitude of issues that you, Senator, should be well aware of. These issues arise when either one of 2 things happen. Number 1, the pharmaceutical industry gets rejected for their drug. As said before, when this happens, they will falsify data to make it seem as if their drug is pretty good just because it's willing to put people in harm's way for the profit they will earn. Even if they get caught, the profit they will earn will be far more than the settlements they have to pay. Number 2, pharmaceutical industry creates these copycat drugs. These drugs will copy other drugs on the market that essentially do the same thing. When this happens, they don't need to get approval from the FDA since there's already a drug on the FDA that's just like it. The problem with this is that if a certain number of drugs gets through this loophole, it will most likely become a different drug overall, thus leading to more adverse effects.
Should drugs be approved after phase 2?
When we look to see a drug should be approved after phase 2, we must not agree with this statement. As I said previously, phase 2 only determines the overall safety of the drug for the target audience of unhealthy individuals. It does not test the effectiveness of the drug. If we were to approve drugs after phase 2, what's to stop the pharmaceutical company from shipping out sugar pills or placebos to the market? If it really did get to this point, the only thing preventing this from happening is the company's overall reputation. If it is leaked or discovered that a pill is simply placebo for a company such as Johnson & Johnson, all their sales of their drug products will drop due to the lack of credibility. However, if this was a small company, then the drug company might be able to get away with this.
And finally, who is liable if the FDA makes a mistake?
To see who is liable when the FDA makes a mistake, it ultimately falls on the drug company. I cannot remember the last time the FDA paid settlement over a drug company. This system is flawed all over for both the drug companies, and the FDA should be held accountable to the fullest extent for their actions, since they both play major roles in putting these malice drugs on the market.
This is Monica Johnson reporting to you from Channel 7 News. Today I'm going to be talking to Mrs. Donahue about the horrific tragedy that happened with her daughter Sammy. So, Mrs. Donahue, can you tell us a bit about what happened to your daughter?
When my sweet Sammy was 13, she got a yeast infection, and so we took her to the clinic, and the doctor sent us home with some pills. But Sammy just couldn't swallow pills, hard as she tried. I mean, we tried for like 2 days. So we went back to the clinic, and the doctor prescribed us the same medication, but in a liquid form. She said it was this new thing, and Sammy was all excited because she knew she could take her medicine now, and she was happy about that. but everything seemed fine at first. But about a week after she started the medication, sorry, she just passed away.
And what happened after Sammy's death? Did the drug company do anything to acknowledge their mistake?
About a month after my sweet Sammy passed, a man from the drug company came to our house, and he tried to write us a check, as if our little girl was worth just money. And I know we really needed the money for our other 3 children, but you can't tell me that my little girl's only worth a certain amount of money. That just ain't right. And she died from a yeast infection. It's because of that medication that they sent her that wasn't safe. And that's just sad and messed up that the world has come to this.
It turns out the doctor had sent Sammy home with Solmidifide, a medication that had been approved by the FDA in pill form. However, because the FDA did not require a new trial for the liquid form of the medication, over 100 people died. It turns out that as the compounds in the drug dissolve, they turn into diethylene glycol.
And unfortunately, with drug companies, we run into this dodgy area with the FDA. As you can see from that report, things get really tough. With that, I would like to move on to our third expert. What is IP?
So IP stands for the intellectual property law. It serves to protect the rights of a person or business that has created an artistic work. And artistic work refers to discoveries, inventions, designs, symbols, and more. A common form of IP regulation is through patents. Patents are a social contract where the state gives the innovator a temporary 20-year monopoly on their invention. The intended purpose behind this is that ideas or inventions won't disappear once the owner of it passes away, since through this agreement it will be on file with the state. However, this privatization has been argued to be restricting growth in many fields of study.
So, what does it have to do with pharma?
Patents are an extension of intellectual property. The pharmaceutical industry utilizes these patents heavily by claiming exclusive rights to medications they have invented. This prevents others from replicating it and providing the medication at a cheaper price to the world. Unlike other industries, the pharmaceutical one contains products that can be easily replicated with little cost involved. There is scrutiny with this as there is less and less innovative drugs addressing global health issues and more of regular drugs that have just been tweaked a little bit.
Can you tell me what the legal structure is that guides IP issues?
The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, with guidance from the World Trade Organization, requires member nations to enforce guidelines for disputes relating to intellectual property. There are criminal penalties for those breaking the guidelines through counterfeiting or piracy purposes.
Are there any ethical issues at all?
Yes, there are definitely ethical issues involved with this law. One example of this is the Moore versus Regents of the University of California case. John Moore, the plaintiff, did not have property rights of his own cell line, which was taken from his spleen. His cells were used to create patented products without his consent when he went in for cancer treatment by the physicians there. Despite the acknowledgement that Moore was not informed of commercial use of his cells, the court ruled that he was not entitled to property rights because he did not do any of the work on his cell line. Patent-related laws also bring the ethical concern of drug prices. India originally utilized different patent laws, but they changed their laws in 2005 to bring it stricter. This brought fears that the inexpensive generic drugs that India supplied the world were going to disappear. The less stringent patent laws allowed competition to exist in the pharmaceutical market, resulting in lower prices for many essential drugs. But with the new laws, companies can now have exclusive rights to the drug product and the process of making it. In order for another company to reproduce this drug, they must receive permission through a license from the patent holder and pay royalties towards that company. Another issue is the term evergreening. So this refers to the pharmaceutical companies making a small change in their product in order to extend their patent despite little evidence of a therapeutic advantage in the change. The monopoly pharmaceutical companies can gain from patents brings up the main ethics of distributive justice and utilitarianism. Distributive justice is the distribution of costs and benefits from an action made. It states each person should have equal access to pharmaceutical drugs, while utilitarianism is where a decision should maximize the benefits of the largest group of individuals it can receive. The pharmaceutical industry is special as it involves life-saving drugs which heavily affect the world. Decisions made within this industry should increase the accessibility of drugs. Overall, there needs to be a balance between incentivizing the inventors, protecting their products from theft, and the accessibility of life-saving drugs to society.
Should the US address these issues? Why or why not?
Currently, there's a movement within Congress that wants to withdraw the United States from the World Trade Organization. Senator, I believe we should go against this movement as the United States being part of the World Trade Organization brings stability. The World Trade Organization is advantageous as it sets a standard with all the countries within it, so patent trade is regulated. Before World War II, there was no established World Trade Organization, so countries could threaten or blackmail others with trade. The U.S. Patent Act of 1952 is the most prominent patent law in the United States so far. It requires inventions to be novel, useful, non-obvious, and disclose how they replicate this. The US had very lenient patent laws, whereas pharmaceutical companies can easily replicate or receive patents with minor modifications to the drug. I believe there needs to be a greater restriction and limit set so pharmaceuticals don't continue to hold a monopoly over some drugs and continue to raise the drug prices over time.
And now, I'd like to introduce you to our fourth and final expert, Dr. Lon Jewell.
Hello, Mr. Senator. I'm Dr. Lonjewel, the foremost expert on pharmaceutical economics. I understand that there are a few questions you'd like to ask me?
Doctor, why are drug prices so high in the United States?
Well, there are multiple reasons that the cost of drugs is so much higher in the United States than it is in other countries. Most apparently, there is currently no legislation that broadly allows the federal government to control the prices for specific drugs. Additionally, in one case, when a price control law was attempted at the state level, it was ultimately declared unconstitutional by a federal appeals court. However, to control drug prices would be akin to treating the symptoms of a disease rather than the disease itself. The reason these prices can get so high in the first place is because whenever a company develops a new drug, they're then able to patent that molecule, after which the company enjoys a period of 20 years in which they're the only one who can sell it direct to consumers. Even if a drug is not patented, as soon as it has been approved, the Food and Drug Administration is required to enforce an exclusivity period that ranges in length from 3 to 7 years, during which no generic competitors to a brand name drug may be approved for sale. In response to this, one may claim that even in the presence of patents and exclusivity periods, completely different drugs may still exist that serve to combat the same ailment, and this should in turn lead to competition that drives prices down. Unfortunately, this potential for competition is reduced as a result of pharmaceutical companies being legally allowed to provide gifts to physicians. It has been found that physicians who receive such gifts are more likely to both make more prescriptions as well as prescribe more expensive medications. In essence, a company is able to charge more for a similar drug, and as long as your physician prescribes that drug, it is your only choice, even in the presence of lower cost alternatives. Finally, it is worth mentioning that another way of lowering drug prices for U.S. consumers is allowing their importation from countries where they are cheaper. While this is true, such importation has only been allowed on a very limited basis up until just last year concerning imports from Canada.
How much of the money that pharmaceutical companies make is actually redirected back into research and development for new drugs?
In short, big pharmaceutical companies spend a significantly smaller amount of money on new drugs than they would like you to think, and much of the cost is paid for by your taxes. This is because a higher cost of research and development can be used as justification for the high prices the consumers are forced by the company to pay for the drug. According to analysis done by Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, the cost is $2.7 billion. However, a newer analysis that looked at data regarding a number of different cancer drugs found that the research and development costs for an individual drug totaled only $648 million. The first study arrived at such an inflated figure in part by extrapolating how much money used for development of the drug would have been worth had it instead been invested in things such as stocks, and then implying an unrealistically high interest rate. Furthermore, the data used by Tufts in this study is not publicly available, and the center receives a large portion of its funding from pharmaceutical companies, so it cannot be confirmed that this data even accurately represents that of most drugs. In addition to this disparity, it is also true that much of the early stages of drug research and development, those that involve the most risk, are funded by the taxpayer via grants by government organizations to universities. It has been shown that between 210 drugs approved by the FDA, Over $100 billion of the dollars for the research and development came from the National Institutes of Health. It could be said that drug companies are taking some of your money only to justify taking more of your money.
So if we lower drug prices, will all of the advances that we've made be put in jeopardy?
Some would say that a lowering of the prices that consumers pay for prescription drugs would stifle the creation of innovative drugs in the pharmaceutical industry because the companies would receive less profits and therefore not have as much to spend on the development of these new drugs. In order to determine whether this is true in a practical sense, one need only look toward a study that examined Big Pharma's response to Medicare, a program that increased the amount of prescription drugs that were purchased by companies, and therefore their profits, in a non-insignificant manner. As opposed to creating more drugs that acted in novel, innovative manners, this study found that the companies instead created drugs that acted similarly to those already on the market. So, assuming that the prices are not lowered in a drastic manner, there would likely be no decrease in innovation.
Today I'm going to be talking to Mr. Hugh. Mr. Hugh is deathly allergic to nuts. If he consumes any amount of nuts, he will go into anaphylactic shock. Because of this, he needs to keep his EpiPen on him at all times. So, Mr. Hugh, can you tell us why it's challenging to always keep your EpiPen on you?
Well, no, I always got to have my EpiPen on me, the doctor says. But, last month I had to use it because I ate some nuts. And when I went to buy a new one, my rent was also due. So, because it's $650, I didn't just have that cash on me. And, I had to pay my rent, got to have a place to live. So, I'm just going to have to buy an EpiPen as soon as I can get the cash. It's just not always easy to have $650 sitting aside just for an EpiPen.
What's happening to Mr. Hugh is happening with all kinds of different drugs all across the country. Because drug prices are so high, people are being forced to choose to pay their rent or for childcare instead of being able to pay for medications that could save their lives.
So to conclude, I have a handful of steps for you to follow. Step 1. First and foremost, make sure you thank everyone for the love and support that has been coming your way. Step 2. It will be very obvious that you are very green to this topic. And what I mean by that is you are definitely out of your element. So it's important to make sure that you sound intelligent, but also stay upfront and transparent about what you know. This would be something along the lines of, though I am less knowledgeable in this field than my late husband, I have assembled a panel of experts to help guide me and train me on this issue. And I can now say with confidence that I have a firm grasp on what these issues entail. And step 3, be sure not to implement anything controversial or drastic, whether it be ideas or actual changes. This is not the attention that you need right now. Finally, it is most important that you remember you are still grieving. Fortunately, most of America will understand that. But unfortunately, if you stumble, trip over your words, or say the wrong thing, a good chunk of America will hold you accountable to it. And this will be a difficult time. I won't sugarcoat it, you are likely to stumble. However, remember all the love and gracious support that you have received. So in the event if something absolutely catastrophic happens, which I don't believe it will, remember that. That being said, good luck, wear a smile, and get out there.